My name is Manpreet, and if this is the first time that you're meeting me, I have been doing photography professionally for more than 30 years. And currently I'm putting together photography tours to India through Whisk Adventures. Recently I had put out some social media posts showing before and after images, and a number of people have requested for me to go through the detailed process. So in this video, I'm going to take a raw image and take it through to finished using Lightroom and Photoshop. So do follow along and hope it does help. I will be putting up more content like this in this channel, as well as information about the tours. And if this is something that is of interest to you, make sure you subscribe and don't forget to like this video.
Okay, let's talk editing. I'm going to walk through my process of editing a raw image and take it from here to here. Raw image, and I'd always advise everyone to shoot, if possible, in RAW, because RAW is basically data that's been gathered from the sensor, whereas a Jpeg or any other format is pixels that have been baked into the file, and it's not as malleable as a raw file. While photographing on location, you must have heard people say shoot to the right. So what does that really mean? If we look at the histogram here, okay, if the right edge represents the bright areas of the image and the left the dark areas, or you can say the right side is where there was more light data hitting the sensor, and on the left side is where there was lack of. When the histogram touches the right side, it means that you are losing details in the highlights, and those details can never come back. If they're touching the left edge, means you're losing details in the dark shadows. Since there is always more data on the right side where the light is hitting the sensor, so it's a good idea to shoot or to photograph your subject with the histogram pushed as far to the right as possible without touching the right side. That'll give you the maximum data to play with while processing a raw image. Now, this image might appear quite bright, but if I take the exposure down, you can see that there's details in all the light areas. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is bring the exposure down to an area that I like. So I'm looking to make these camels almost like a silhouette. My main area of interest is the evening sunlight that was hitting the clouds. Okay, so if I bring it down to, let's say, about that much, yeah, that much should be fine. And I don't want the shadows totally blocking up, so I am going to open up the shadows, and say about here. A lot of editing is really playing around, and I do move sliders around to see how things will turn out. Although for this tutorial I have gone through this process on this image, so I know exactly what to do. But quite often I'll sit and play with the image, look at it, try different things, and then come up with what I like. Now, obviously I don't want to lose details in the highlight. I will bring this down a little, okay, and I want to increase the temperature to make it look more like what I remember. So somewhere there is what I'd like to make it. And I'll probably increase the tint just a bit to give it that golden feeling rather than the yellow, a little bit orange in it. Now, because of that, everything has become yellowish. So I would like to do a little bit of color grading here. Now in color grading, you have these three areas to play with. Represents the shadows, that's the highlight, and that's the midtone. So I want to introduce a little bit of blue in the shadow area. So somewhere there. But the highlights I want going to reddish orange. So let's say there. Okay. Now the further away you take this circle from the center, the more the saturation. Take it closer, the less the saturation. So visually, I will just look at the image as to what appeals to me, and somewhere around there. But in this case, I would also like to increase dehaze. Now dehaze is a slider which you have to be very careful about. Dehaze can, if used excessively, crunch up details, but in this particular case I am going to use it a little more aggressively than I normally do, just to bring about the saturation of the image. And I don't mind the camels becoming a silhouette here. Okay, now so about there should be fine, about 50. Also, I would like to increase the yellow golden effect in the clouds. So, this, by the way, was photographed in a cold desert up north of India called Ladakh, and that's where you have this high altitude deserts, and you have the double humpback camels, and that's why you can see there are clouds and desert sand dunes all together. So I want to localize the clouds, making them warm. So I'm going to take a localized radial gradient, and I am going to increase the warmth here. So say about that much, and see how they become nice and golden. But I'd like to follow this direction so that that's where the sun was hitting the clouds. It was coming from the right side, and I want it falling off into a little bit of blue. Now blue and yellow, they're contrasting colors, they emphasize each other, so that works well, except now I also have yellow on the sand dunes, which I don't want. So how do I take that away? If I press O, it shows me the mask of the radial gradient. Now what I'll do is I'll intersect this mask with the luminance range and take it away from the dark areas, like so. So you just kind of play with that till it's gone from the sand dunes. And there you have it. So I press O again to see the effect. Right now, the sand dune is looking rather flat. So I want a little bit of three-dimensionality to it. So I'm going to add a linear gradient, reduce the exposure just a bit, and take it up from down. So this will almost give it like a 3D feel, make it feel that it's round. And I think that's about how much I am going to do in Lightroom. I am ready to take this image into Photoshop to do some color toning. I could get rid of this bystander here in Lightroom if I was not using Photoshop. I think Photoshop does a better job of retouching. So that's what I am going to do there. Now, I like to take my images into Photoshop as smart objects. If you do a direct edit in Photoshop, it will send it to Photoshop as a TIFF file or a PSD depending on how you have set up the Lightroom preferences. But as a smart object, I still have the base layer as a raw file. And if I was to lose my original raw file and have only the PSD, I'll still retain the capabilities of, using that layer as a raw file. So what I do is press Control and edit in, open a smart object in Photoshop. So now in Photoshop, if I press F, I like to make this, this is how I like to work. I generally have all my tools on my second monitor, but for today's talk, I'm going to just have the basic tools on the same screen. Now, over here, to get rid of that person, put a separate layer over here, and we have a new tool called Remove Tool that works brilliantly for such things. And if I zoom in, okay, all I need to do is circle this guy and AI takes care of the rest of it. And I think there's a bit of blades of grass or tops of trees that are showing there, which also need to get rid of. I don't think there's anything else that needs retouching here. All I need to do is color toning. So for color toning, what I like to do is set up a color lookup layer, and in the color lookup table, I personally like to change this to soft light because it has a, personally I think soft light adds a little contrast, saturation, and makes it look really nice. And then I can reduce the opacity of the layer. So I start off with a 50% opacity layer. So if I hit 5 on the keyboard, it brings the opacity of the layer to 50%. Now, for the color lookup table, there are some that I have my favorites. Fall color is something that I use a lot, and that gives a nice effect here. If I look at crisp warm, that's also not bad. You can look at soft warming, and I think what works best for this particular image is this late sunset, and that gives it a nice contrast. But at 50%, it's a little bit too much. So I might bring that down to, let's say, about 25%. So if I hit 25 quickly on the keyboard, that'll give me 25 as the opacity, layer opacity. And so you can see before and after. Now I also think that I can increase the drama in the clouds here. So what I'm going to do is add another filter on this. And to do that, I'll make a merge visible layer. So if I press Shift, Command, Option, and then E, I get a merge visible layer on top. So it combines all the layers and makes one layer out of it. And if you don't remember that keyboard shortcut, there's another way to do it. So let me undo that by hitting Command Z and Control Z for PC users. And if you look at this hamburger icon here, click on it, you have merge visible here, which gives you the shortcut Shift Command E. Now this will merge all the layers into one layer and not on top. But if I press Option while clicking this, I get the same thing. So I get a merge visible layer. My filter can be applied to this, but before I do that, I would like to convert this to a smart object. Converting it to a smart object enables me to have the filter not baked in, so I can go back and change the filter as I want. The filter I'm going to apply to this is the camera raw filter. Now the same thing can be done in Lightroom as well, but I like to do it as a layer so I can very easily change the opacity of the layer if I wish. And if you look here, we have some presets. There's a new set of presets after AI was introduced called adaptive sky, adaptive subject, adaptive blur background. I'm looking at the adaptive sky, and if you just hover over these, you'll see that they have different effects. The one that I'm looking for is called blue drama. If I do that, it takes the sky portion of the image and increases the contrast, also adds a little blue. And I can reduce the effect because right now it's a little too strong. I'll reduce it till where I think looks nice and say OK. Now this has applied the camera raw filter, and I can also further reduce the opacity should I want. So say somewhere about there. And I think that's pretty much it in Photoshop. I am almost done here. If I close this and save it out, it'll come back into Lightroom. So here we are back into Lightroom. The only thing I'd like to add is that I may open up the shadows just a tad, and I would like to perhaps darken the tops just a little to draw attention down here, which is my main subject. So I'll use a linear gradient and reduce the exposure just a little bit and take it from top down very gradually. And so somewhere there should be really nice. And let me see, I might increase the contrast just a tad, and we are pretty much done with this. So now I do hope you learned something from here and can apply it in your own work, but make sure that when you're photographing on location to keep maximum amount of data in the raw file that you can. Then once you have the raw file in Lightroom, feel free to play around with it and come up with ways of editing that are your own. So other than that, have a wonderful editing day.